Excellent playing. Excellent singing. We try. We don't always succeed, but we keep trying. That's the goal, isn't it? I was asked this year if I could do a sermon to discuss some of my ideas and thoughts relating to Unitarian Universalism and the Urantia book. Some of my better thoughts and ideas come from my reading of the Urantia book. Of course, I said I would, but then I spent a good portion of 2 months trying to figure out what I would say and write down something that might help a bit with this scary journey we call life. A life lived without the authoritarian support of just falling in line and activated by thinking through those things that we are taught and sometimes led to believe. Back in 97 or so, I was searching for truth and knowledge, finding quite a mishmash of stuff out there. Found writings such as Seth Speaks, supposedly a channeled work, the words and history of a 1930s sleeping prophet called Edgar Casey, or people pronounce his last name differently, and number of other books such as the Celestine Prophecy. All were quite interesting, but it seemed like they didn't have any real answers for questions I really didn't know how to ask. It seemed these answers were being elusive, but it was an exciting adventure nonetheless. Everything I found kept giving me that feeling that there just might be something more out there, and now in 97, I've got this new search tool. It's called the World Wide Web, and I can use it to find it. I searched on things like bones of giants that have been occasionally dug up through history and quickly disappearing. It seems as if there are those who just don't want us to know what's going on around the world. This information wasn't going to change my life, but it was fascinating seeing all these little pieces of information coming to light, and it really showed me how confused this planet really is. Then I visited a good scripture studying friend of mine and telling him about the discoveries that I've made in my adventure journey of trying to find truth. While I was in the middle of talking about all these things, he quipped that Jesus taught in the manner of Melchizedek. What? What does that even mean? How did Melchizedek teach? Who is Melchizedek? Have any of you ever heard of that name?
No. Really?
Few of you. Melchizedek is a name that crops up in the Bible's Old Testament around the biblical time of Abram, whose name was later changed to Abraham. According to the Bible, Abraham talked directly to the Lord, but he also talked to someone called Melchizedek, the king of Salem, and a prophet who came out of nowhere and left the same way. I found the name Melchizedek strange enough that it might be internet searchable, so I searched. I really didn't have to search very long, though. The majority of sites on Melchizedek basically took the ideas of when he was mentioned in the Bible, and they were very subjective according to what they believed, and it was all human-based ideas. One site, though, was very detailed in who he was and what he did while he was here. It talked about the Salem teachers that spread his teachings around the world. It talked about these teachers being the main reason for one concept in one form or another, ending up being in almost every organized religion in the world. The ideal? Love your neighbor as yourself. It was the name Melchizedek that was instrumental in my discovery of the Urantia book. This discovery subsequently led me to decide to attend the Unitarian Universalist Church about 10 years later. The reason I chose UU was because it was open to discovering truth from wherever it chances to appear. We don't rely on any one book for our discoveries of truth. We discover the best ones through living and standing on the side of love. Urantia, the celestial name of our world, the book tells us that it is a fallacy for any group of religionists to conceive of their creed as the truth. Such attitudes bespeak more of theological arrogance than of certainty of faith. There is not a Urantia religion that could not profitably study and assimilate the best truths contained in every other faith, for all contain truth. Religionists would do better to borrow the best in their neighbor's living spiritual faith rather than to denounce the worst in their lingering superstitions and outworn rituals. To me, that's what UU attempts to do. Our first principle says that we recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every person. As a lad, I was often told that God can only forgive us now because he sent his only begotten Son to be whipped, nailed to a cross, and to die in the most disgraceful manner as a sacrifice. This is false. Because in truth, I can now see that God, by whatever name you choose to use, loves everyone exactly the same. He or she does not respect or love anyone more than you. He does not place one person over another. You are valued by God so much that he put a fragment of himself within you. It simply will reside there, waiting for you. And should you decide to connect to it and listen to what that small, still voice is saying, this fragment or spark, as you may decide to call it, will assist you through those moments of loneliness or tribulation life brings. Not necessarily to stop you from having to go through these experiences, but to experience life with you and through you, to assist you in discovering the best way to deal with it. You, whether you know it or not, simply cannot or simply can't believe it, are loved with an equal intensity that is, was, or has been given to every human hero you can think of, as blessed with God's love. You don't even have to believe in God to know within that something like that small, still voice is residing there. Who is it you were talking to when you were thinking about a problem or difficulty? Trying to figure out in your head what your next move should be? How often has a difficulty kept you awake until exhaustion forced you to sleep, but upon that, during that sleep, the answer to your next move suddenly showed up? This is that fragment at work, never controlling you, but ever ready to lovingly assist you in your determined resolution. The second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. This is my copy of the Urantia book. Big, thick book, 2,097 pages, 192 papers, and quite an intimidating read. The Urantia book informs us that society is evolutionary and that most of the inequalities of life are usually better resolved as the civil world slowly advances. It discusses many of the different stages society evolve on all the worlds of ascending mortals, as well as explaining how uniquely different this world is and how it has evolved socially. The celestials, I like to call them that as a collective group of spiritual beings, know that they could come down here, show themselves, and fix their society to set it on the correct path. They also know that most of whatever they do simply will not take hold or last. We will quickly abandon whatever answers they brought to us simply because we didn't discover it the hard way on our own. So the world and this country has to figure out as a people what to do when the Trumps arise. Meanwhile, there are also spiritual beings we cannot see invisibly acting to prevent the worst case scenarios from actually happening. It doesn't mean that some of these problems won't happen, but that lessons preventing it in the future may better result from our going through them. When the entire world finally gets to the point where we have justice, equity, and compassion in our human relations, we will have most likely reached the stage of what the Urantia book calls light and life. This is a stage of life I can only imagine. I'm sure it's not going to happen in my lifetime or even in many generations. When it does happen, and I'm sure it will, I will be a lot further along in my personal journey, but I will be given the opportunity to observe it. Principle 3, acceptance of one another and encouragement of spiritual growth in our congregations. One thing the Urantia book taught me was that truth and true religion is not organized. It is dynamic, fluid, and personal. Traditions, beliefs, and organized religions are most often stagnant and dying. They have no way of providing answers to a world of people whose social and civil life is changing radically from one generation to the next, and too often even within the generation we're in. We're all on this same road. It has many paths, some better, some not so good, but eventually all will lead to the same place or absolute truth. How one gets there can only be determined by the individual person and their connection with their spark within. And the Urantia book tells us by utilizing another gift given to us by Jesus. It's called the Spirit of Truth. Our goal is to learn how to love each other even when we find it extremely difficult to even like each other. If it was easy, then we wouldn't need to learn it. Fourthly, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. I found what I consider great truth, meaning, and values in the Urantia book. When I first discovered it and read it, I felt this spiritual urge to get up on my rooftop and yell it out to the world. The effective reality of attempting this quickly sets in. In my 20 years after having read this, I'm not sure if anyone I've ever spoke to about it has ever really taken it up and read it completely. They've never said anything to me if they did. I am just happy that some have listened and given it a look anyways. I was searching when I found it. Those who I talked to, well, they might not just be searching at all. They might not be ready for it. Or they might fear its magnitude, intensity, and complexity. I'm amazed sometimes, though, when I come across individuals who I recognize have already reached some of the more spiritual insights without even knowing the book exists. The Unitarian Universalist congregation has more agnostics, pagans, and atheists actually living God's will than do many thousands of churches full of so-called Christians. By their fruits will you know them. The fifth principle, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. The Urantia book is not a religious book. Although it talks extensively about religion, it is a major factor in our planet's evolutionary history. Religion is. It also talks much about philosophy and governance, among other things such as evolution, the over-control of the planets, and the function and forming of the universes. It talks about how different parts of the universes are governed, and that there is indeed a spirit-guided governance on every evolving planet. It tells us that democracy is a major advancement of society, but it has its dangers also. What we see happening in our world today is one of those dangers described to us in 1934 and printed in 1955. It says, democracy, while an ideal, is a product of civilization, not of evolution. Go slowly, select carefully, for the dangers of democracy are, 1, glorification of mediocrity. choice of base and ignorant rulers, failure to recognize the basic facts of social evolution, danger of universal suffrage in the hands of uneducated and indolent majorities, slavery to public opinion. The majority is not always right. Public opinion, common opinion, has always delayed society. Nevertheless, it is valuable, for while retarding social evolution, it does preserve civilization. Education of public opinion is the only safe and true method of accelerating civilization. Force is only a temporary expedient, and cultural growth will increasingly accelerate as bullets give way to ballots. Public opinion, the mores, is the basic and elemental energy in social evolution and state development. But to be of state value, it must be nonviolent in expression. Our sixth principle is the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Like I was saying, when this world reaches the point where these goals are realized, then we will have reached the spiritual level the Urantia book calls light and life. The Urantia book tells us that it is enough of a reach of the material mind of the children of time to conceive of the Father in eternity. We know that any child can best relate themselves to reality by first mastering the relationships of the child-parent situation, and then by enlarging this concept to embrace the family as a whole. Subsequently, the growing mind of the child will be able to adjust to the concept of family relations, to relationships of community, the race, the world, and then to those of the universe, the super universe, even the universe of universes. But mortals are not saved or ennobled by pressure. Spirit growth springs from within the evolving soul. Pressure may deform the personality, but it never stimulates growth. Even educational pressure is only negatively helpful in that it may aid in the prevent of a disastrous experience. Spiritual growth is greatest where all external pressures are at a minimum. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Mankind develops best when the pressures of home, community, church, and state are least. But this must not be construed as meaning there is no place in a progressive society for home, social institutions, church, and state. The religion of the kingdom is personal, individual. The fruits, the results, are familial, social. Jesus never failed to exalt the sacredness of the individual as contrasted with the community. But he also recognized that man develops his character by unselfish service, that he unfolds his moral nature in loving relations with his fellows. Our last principle is respect the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. The Urantia book tells us that of an inhabited universe of universes, it tells us that it is created with the intention of guiding imperfection along the path to enlightenment and perfection. There are many millions of worlds where God, with the work of his manifold created beings, uses evolution to bring about planets full of what they term ascending mortal creatures. This interdependent web of all existence was created for the establishment and growth of a well-nigh unlimited number of unique free will potential candidates. Each of us is a part of the sum total, a unique part. God will not create any other person exactly like you. According to the Urantia book, Jesus said to someone, Job was altogether right when he challenged the doctrine that God afflicts children in order to punish their parents. Job was ever ready to admit that God is righteous, but he longed for some soul-satisfying revelation of the personal character of the eternal. And that is our mission on earth. No more shall suffering mortals be denied the comfort of knowing the love of God and understand the mercy of the Father in heaven. While the speech of God spoken from a whirlwind was a majestic concept for the day of its utterance, you have already learned that the Father does not thus reveal himself, but rather that he speaks within the human heart as a still, small voice saying, "This is the way, walk therein." Do you not comprehend that God dwells within you, that he has become what you are so that he may make you what he is? We as Unitarian Universalists, for the most part, reject the religion of Christianity using Jesus. But as you use, I realize that most often we are actually living the religion of Jesus, even though we don't necessarily regard it as such. Thank you.